Hey guys, I'm Aaliyah Tolliver, and I will be summarizing chapter 2 in the Coercion and its Fallout book. And the name of chapter 2 is Not All Control is Coercion. So, Sidman starts the chapter by discussing like if control and coercion are the same, and how coercion is a subcategory of control. And he also goes into behavioral control as well, and if behavioral control is the same as coercion. And he talks about on page 30 briefly about how there is different controversies surrounding behavior analysis and what people believe is expected, or what people think that behavior analysts expect, and what we, or what as future behavior analysts would do. So the general public believe that behavior analysis is all about punishment, and that will be a form of control. And people believe that behavior analysts also are advocates for control and coercion, and that we should be forced into do things. But behavior analysts see control as a fact of nature to be investigated and described, and control is just built in our everyday lives in the world we live in. The moment that we're born, even before we're born, control is already at play. For example, in our genes, biologically, physiologically, that there is control at play. He talks about on page 30 at the bottom that about planets and how the movements of objects and planets in outer space are controlled by gravity, for example, and by different things that happen in the atmosphere. And for example, genes control our different body parts, how they look, and even if we look like our parents, we are not exactly the same as them, but our genes control how we look and possibly how we behave as well. Then he goes on to page 31 to discuss that behavior control is a matter of fact, and we can either reject it or advocate it. And those people who repel behavior or feel that behavior is coercion are united by fear, and that if you rather not look at the laws of behavior and control and not want to study them, that you are united by fear with others who think the same way as you. So he goes in talking about how we are always being coerced into doing things that can be convenient for somebody else, like somebody else's schedule. We've all probably had to do things that we did not want to do to help somebody out, or maybe we had to change the appointment because it worked better with somebody else's time, even though we wanted to do it on a specific day. So in our everyday lives, we are being coerced into doing things that we really don't want to do, whether that's by family, friends, the government, for example, like police, by teachers, by our rivals, etc. And we as people, we desire freedom from that coercion. We desire to do things that we want to do and not always be controlled by authoritative figures, for example. And then he keeps discussing how we fear control, regardless of if behavior analysis and behavior analysts want to just make people understand that regardless of if this science of behavior analysis ever existed, that control will always exist just because it's in our world by nature. And as behavior analysts, we can study coercion and control. We can take coercive methods and make them non-coercive in our everyday lives to benefit us in the end, so we don't always feel like we're being forced to do things that we really don't want to do. Sidman then goes on to page 32 at the bottom to discuss what behavior is. So he starts with the general definition of behavior, as I'm pretty sure we all know, as things we do, like walking, talking, reaching to do something, hiking. Those are all things that we can do. And some behaviors are observable, measurable, And these are things that can be described to somebody else. But there's also behaviors that are more private, that are more internal, that cannot always be observable or measurable, such as thinking, talking to oneself, imagining different things, and worrying. Sigmund then goes on to discuss that those behaviors that we see and how we, as people, how we're defined by those behaviors. And he says that the world reacts to what it sees or hears us doing, which I thought was a really different way to think about it that I've personally never thought about it. That he gives examples of people who've had strokes or people who've been in accidents or maybe have like had a stroke and like lost their speech, and how people now treat them differently, obviously. And people like, I know, for example, I worked with students who have had seizures, and now they might be like in a wheelchair due to their seizures, due to their other disorders and things like that. And people do initially look at them differently than what they had looked at them prior to them being in those accidents. So I thought that Sidman made a really great point in those examples. And then he goes on to discuss just different aspects of behavior analysis and what behavior analysis is supposed to be about. So behavior analysis, and as analysts, we seek laws that apply to all conduct, that apply to all behaviors. And we discover and we try to explain the likelihood of that action that will take place, how often the individual does something. We record data on that, as we all know, like frequency or count. We even take duration data in this field. We look at why behavior or what makes a behavior occur, or why this person is behaving in that particular way, such as in the function of behavior. And we study observable and measurable conditions in which a person is more likely to or less likely to do something. He then goes on to discuss behavior and its consequences on page 34. And as we know, even consequences are things that happen after a behavior. And then the fundamental law that Sidman wrote down was consequences control behavior. And those consequences of our actions control how we behave, whether we do that behavior more or less. On page 36, he discusses what is coercion, and it is the feeling of being compelled to do something because of a threat to do so, and that's doing things against our will. And behavior analysis looks at the perspective that all behavior is controlled, which means that everything that we're doing in our everyday lives would be considered against our will. And then Sidman looks at positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. Positive reinforcement, he feels, is non-coercive. And as we know, positive reinforcement makes actions that produce them, that will make them more likely to occur. And he feels like negative reinforcement and punishment are coercive. And then important factors that he notes for reinforcement and reinforcers would be time and functional. And he breaks that down a little bit. He breaks it down more in describing like the differences between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, and why one is coercive and why one is not. And he talks about how negative reinforcement has unintended side effects, and depending on in a person's life how they're being negatively reinforced, it can lead to characteristics of their personality, and it could then lead to how a person adapts to society, how they react to things that happen in our society. And then he asks the question about which is in control, positive or negative reinforcement, which is something I think as behavior analysts, we definitely have to pay attention to, like what is really controlling that behavior. Is this student or this client doing things because they've been positively reinforced or negatively reinforced? And that's things that we can study from doing like different research studies and things. He also talks about punishment and how there's two types of punishment, meaning there's like a loss of positive reinforcers or there's a production of negative ones. And he just further ends the chapter with breaking down coercion and just we are once again frequently coerced into actions that we don't want to do, and how our conscious develops from coercive control. And our conscious is not really right or wrong, it's only a sense of wrong, because with that sense of wrong, our conduct is punished. And that in our everyday society, it tries to maintain our conscience through coercive control, like I said, with our teachers, with our police, or any type of authoritative figure that might make a person feel coerced. And my discussion question is, as behavior analysts, as future behavior analysts, do you believe behavioral control is the same as coercion? And in your own words, explain why or why not, and do you believe that control is a fact of nature? Thanks, guys.